There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when someone powerful is about to be destroyed. Brickey Osei knew that silence. He had felt it before, not in ballrooms like this one, but in waiting rooms, in immigration offices, in the back of taxis where he counted coins and hoped it would be enough. He knew what it felt like when a room decided something was already over. And right now, that room had decided something about Ruth Harlow. She was standing near the window of the Meridian Grand's East Ballroom, champagne glass tilting, words coming out in the wrong order. She was a VP at a company that carried her own family's name. She was also very clearly no longer in control of herself. And the people around her weren't worried. They were waiting. Phones were already rising. Conversations were already going quiet at the edges. Across the room, two of her colleagues, Mary and Kish, were watching her with the kind of patience that only comes when you already know the ending. Brickey saw it in 4 seconds. This was not an accident. Someone had arranged this. He had a daughter at home, a visa renewal that could go either way, a record with no room for a single mistake. Every careful, practical thing he had ever learned told him to turn around, to keep walking, to mind his own life. He picked up a tray instead. He walked toward her. What he did not know, what nobody told him, was that a photographer was already inside the building, badge on, lens raised, waiting for exactly this moment. He had 30 seconds to stop it. He reached her in 11 steps. He counted them later, as the way you count things that almost didn't happen. 11 steps across a marble floor past a cluster of shareholders, around a waiter carrying a tray of sparkling water, through the low hum of a room that was pretending very hard not to stare. 11 steps between the man he was supposed to be tonight, invisible, professional, useful only when needed, and the decision that would unravel the next 4 days of his life. Ruth Harlow was mid-sentence when he arrived beside her. He couldn't tell what she was saying. The words were arriving in pieces like a radio signal breaking up over distance. Her hand moved when she spoke, a habit probably in meetings and boardrooms, but now the gesture was slightly too wide, too slow, like her body was compensating for something her mind hadn't yet admitted. Up close, it was worse. Her eyes couldn't quite settle. They moved across the room and found nothing to land on. The champagne glass in her hand was nearly empty, which made it the 4th Brickey had tracked her with since 8 o'clock. He had a quiet habit of watching glassware at events. Not out of suspicion, just attention. It was part of the job. Know the room. Know who needs water before they ask. Know when a situation is about to become a situation. He knew this one. But something had been bothering him since the 2nd hour of the gala, sitting at the back of his mind like a detail he hadn't yet placed. Ruth had only ordered twice, he was certain of it. He'd been near the North Bar both times, once fetching a replacement linen, once redirecting a server. And he'd watched her order directly, clearly. The way someone in control of herself orders a drink. Those were the first 2 glasses. The other 2 had come from servers he didn't recognize from her section. He ran the layout in his head. The East Bar was assigned to Marco and Sasha, the North Bar to Diane, the floor servers between the windows. That was Priya and the new hire whose name he still hadn't learned. He knew every assignment tonight. He'd written the sheet himself. The drinks that reached Ruth's hand from the 3rd glass onward hadn't come from any of them. He set his tray on the nearest surface, a side table near the curtains, and let his eyes move across the room without moving his head. It was a skill he'd developed over years of working rooms where people weren't supposed to know they were being watched. Mary was near the center column, a phone face up in her palm, thumb scrolling without reading, the kind of scrolling that was really waiting. Kish had positioned himself near the east entrance, not talking to anyone, not drinking, not doing anything a person does at a party they are genuinely attending. He was angled outward, watching the door and the room at the same time. Neither of them had looked at Ruth in the last 4 minutes. That was the detail that finally placed itself. People who are worried about someone look at them. People who are watching something happen look at everything except the thing they arranged. Brickey felt the understanding arrive in his chest before it reached his thoughts. This was not a woman who had lost track of her evening. This was a woman who had been steered carefully, incrementally, across 2 hours and 4 glasses, to exactly this moment in exactly this room, surrounded by exactly these people. He had maybe 90 seconds before she said something she couldn't take back, before someone's phone caught it, before a sentence left her mouth that would spend the next 6 months in a headline, a shareholder letter, a reason given in a quiet conference room for why Ruth Harlow was no longer the right fit for her position. 90 seconds. He started calculating how to move her, where to go, what story would explain the exit without creating a bigger scene than the one he was trying to prevent. His mind worked quickly in moments like this. It always had. When you have spent years managing situations with very few resources, you learn to think in options rather than obstacles. And then he looked toward the east corridor. The photographer was standing near the pillar at the corridor entrance, badge clipped to a lanyard, camera raised to just below eye level, not shooting yet, waiting for the composition to arrive. The patient, practiced stillness of someone who had been told where to stand and what to wait for. The camera was pointed at Ruth. 90 seconds became 30. Brickey stopped calculating. There was no longer time for the careful version. He picked up his tray, turned back toward Ruth Harlow, and walked to her side with the calm, deliberate movement of a man who belonged exactly where he was going. Because the only thing more useful than a plan in a room full of people waiting for something to go wrong is the appearance of one. The platter hit the marble at full force. Brickey had calculated the angle before he let it go. Enough distance from the nearest guest to avoid injury, close enough to the center of the room to pull every eye in the building. The crash was enormous. Canapes scattered across the floor in every direction. A woman near the string quartet gasped. 2 waiters spun around. Someone near the bar said something sharp and startled, and the low, sophisticated murmur of the gala collapsed into the sudden, collective attention of a room that had just heard something go wrong. Every phone turned toward the sound. Every eye followed. Brickey was already moving. He reached Ruth in 3 steps, placed one hand lightly at her elbow, and leaned close enough that no one across the room could read his lips. He said 2 words, low and even. On the way you speak to someone who needs steadiness more than explanation. "Come with me." She looked at him. Just for a moment, her eyes finding his face and holding it the way a person holds something fixed when the ground beneath them isn't. Then she nodded. One small movement. And she let him lead her. He kept his pace unhurried. That was important. Panic draws attention. Purpose doesn't. To anyone glancing over from the canapé disaster, they were simply 2 people moving through a room, a staff member guiding a guest. Nothing unusual, nothing worth watching when there was a mess on the other side of the ballroom still pulling focus. He steered her around the edge of the crowd past the draped service entrance, through a door that required a staff key card he'd had for 3 years and never once used for anything like this. And the service corridor was narrow and fluorescent and honest in the way that backstage spaces always are, stripped of the marble and the candlelight and the performance of elegance. Ruth's heels were loud on the concrete floor. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her to. He stopped at the service elevator, pressed the button, and turned to the bartender who had followed them as far as the corridor entrance. A young man named Eli, whose eyes were asking a question his mouth hadn't formed yet. Brickey looked at him for one long second. Eli looked back. Then he turned around and walked back toward the ballroom. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in. On the 4th floor, Brickey walked Ruth to the end of the guest corridor. away from the event suites, away from the rooms that would have staff passing through. Suite 412 was the quietest room in the building on a gala night. He had cleaned it himself that afternoon. He knew it was unoccupied. He encoded the key card at the housekeeping station using his supervisor access and opened the door without logging it against any account. He did not call the front desk. He did not create a paper trail. He did not do any of the things his job technically required him to do in a situation like this, because all of those things would have left a record, and a record would have turned a moment of grace into a headline of a different kind. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a while. The room was quiet. The city sat outside the window, indifferent and glittering. After a moment, she said, "I only ordered twice tonight." "I know," Brickey said. She looked up at him. Something moved across her face. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of it. Then she lay back against the pillow, and within minutes her breathing had slowed into sleep. Brickey found a folding chair near the closet and set it in the hallway just outside her door. He sat down. He loosened his collar by one button. He listened to the muffled sound of the gala drifting up from the floors below, the music, the applause, the clean noise of a successful event continuing without its sabotage. He sat there for 2 hours. When the ballroom finally went quiet and the last of the staff sounds faded from the corridors below, he stood, stretched his back, and took the service elevator down to the ground floor. He retrieved his jacket from the staff room. He signed out at 12:04 a.m. He walked to the parking structure, got into his car, and drove home in the dark. He told himself it was over, that he had handled it cleanly, that in the morning Ruth Harlow would wake up in a quiet room, remember what she could, and find her own way back to her life, that no one would need to know his name was part of any of it. He was still telling himself this when he pulled into his parking space and cut the engine. At 11:47 p.m., while he had been sitting in that folding chair, listening to the city, Mary had sent Kish a text message. It said, "He moved her. This is actually better." Kish had replied with a single word, "Perfect." Brickey didn't know that yet. He went upstairs, checked on Jean, and went to bed. Brickey's phone rang at 7:52 in the morning. He was standing at the kitchen counter making Jean's lunch, the same thing he made every Thursday. And because Jean had decided months ago that Thursdays were for cheese sandwiches, and he had long since stopped negotiating with 8-year-olds about food. He had slept 4 hours. He felt it in the specific way you feel a short night when the day ahead already has weight. Not in your eyes or your head, but somewhere lower, in the part of you that knows. The number on the screen was the Meridian Grand's main line. He set down the bread knife. He answered. The voice on the other end was Ross Andrews' assistant. Courteous, brief, the way assistants are when the message they're delivering has already been decided above them. Mr. Andrews would like to see him. 9 o'clock. The administrative wing. Not the staff room, not his supervisor's office. The administrative wing. Brickey said he would be there. He finished making the sandwich. He cut it the way Jean liked, diagonal, not straight across, because she had once told him that triangles tasted better and he had never found a reason to argue. He put it in the container. He wrote her name on the lid with the marker they kept on the second shelf. He woke her up, helped her find her left shoe, and walked her to the corner where the school transport collected her every morning. She waved at him from the window as it pulled away. He stood on the pavement for a moment after it turned the corner in the thin morning light, with his hands in his jacket pockets and the particular stillness of a man preparing himself for something he cannot yet name. He arrived at the Meridian Grand at 10 minutes to 9. He knew something was wrong before he reached the administrative wing. He could feel it in the hallway, in the way 2 colleagues looked at him and then quickly didn't, in the way the morning energy of the building had a specific texture around him, the texture of people who had already been talking. He had grown up understanding that texture. He had felt it in schools, in offices, in the background hum of rooms where someone had already decided something about him before he walked in. He knocked on Ross's door at exactly 9 o'clock. The office was large and carefully arranged in the way that offices are when they are meant to remind you of something. Ross Andrews sat behind a wide desk with the posture of a man who had been waiting long enough to settle into it. He gestured to the chair across from him without getting up. On the desk between them was a document. Several pages. His paper clipped at the corner with a pen laid across the top. Ross did not open by asking how Brickey was. He did not offer water. He folded his hands and spoke in the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed the version of this conversation that caused the least disruption to his morning. He said there had been an incident at last night's event. He said a member of staff had been seen removing a senior executive from the event floor without authorization, directing her to an unlocked room in a manner that several witnesses had described as, he paused here, choosing the word carefully, irregular. Brickey listened. Ross mentioned that 3 members of staff had already provided accounts consistent with this description. He mentioned that the Harlow account represented a significant portion of the venue's annual bookings and that the Meridian Grand's priority at this moment was to handle the matter with discretion and professionalism. He mentioned, almost gently, almost as if it were simply an administrative detail passing through a larger conversation, that Brickey's work authorization renewal was still being processed, and that these things could sometimes be complicated by open incident reviews, and that the company had always tried to be supportive about that kind of complexity. Then he stopped talking. He let the silence do the rest. The pen was right there. Brickey picked up the document and read it. He read it slowly, both pages, every clause, the way you read something when you want the other person to understand that you understand exactly what it says. It was a confidentiality agreement. It covered the events of the previous evening in language careful enough to have been written before those events had fully concluded. The date in the top right corner confirmed that it had been. He thought about Jean's lunch container in her bag. He thought about the school transport turning the corner. He thought about the drinks that came from the wrong servers and the photographer who had been told where to stand, and Mary and Kish watching from across the room with the patience of people who had already written the ending. He set the document back on the desk. He placed the pen on top of it, parallel to the paper clip, exactly where it had been. Ross's expression did not change, not a flicker. He simply looked at Brickey for a moment and then said quietly and finally, "Don't come in tomorrow." What neither of them knew, what no one in that carefully arranged office knew, was that 4 floors above them in Suite 412, Ruth Harlow had been awake since 6 in the morning. She remembered everything. She had already called the front desk 3 times asking for the name of the staff member who had helped her the night before. She had been told each time that there was no record of the room being occupied. She called a 4th time and asked to speak to the manager on duty. She was placed on hold. She did not hang up. The first day of the suspension, Brickey cleaned the apartment. Not because it needed it. He kept things tidy as a habit. The way people do when they have learned that small order is the only kind reliably within reach. He cleaned because his hands needed something to do that wasn't thinking. He wiped down the kitchen counters. He reorganized the shelf above Jean's desk where her school things collected into small, chaotic piles. He fixed the bathroom cabinet hinge that had been loose for 3 weeks and that he had been meaning to get to on a day when other things weren't more urgent. Apparently, this was that day. He did not call anyone. He did not check the Meridian Grand staff message board, which he had been quietly removed from sometime between Thursday evening and Friday morning. He made Jean's dinner, helped her with a worksheet about fractions, and listened to her describe a disagreement she'd had with a girl at school with the seriousness it deserved, and put her to bed at the usual time. He sat in the kitchen afterward for a long while, just sitting. The apartment was very quiet. The second morning arrived the way second mornings of bad weeks always do. Gray at the edges, carrying the previous day's weight without the previous day's momentum to make it bearable. Brickey made coffee. He stood at the counter and drank it and looked at the wall. He was thinking about Friday, about what gets filed on Friday and what it means for a visa renewal when there is a termination on record, about the particular arithmetic of a life built carefully and the specific violence of watching someone else decide to subtract from it. He almost didn't see it. Jean had stuck it to the refrigerator sometime in the last 2 days. He couldn't say exactly when because he hadn't been looking at the refrigerator the way you look at something, only the way you look past things when your mind is somewhere else. It was held up by the strawberry magnet she had chosen herself at a street market 2 summers ago, insisting on it with the complete conviction that 8-year-olds bring to small purchases. A piece of lined notebook paper. Her handwriting, careful, slightly uneven, the letters still negotiating their size. At the top in her teacher's printed font on a cut strip of paper that had been glued on, write about someone you admire. He set down his coffee cup. She had written 6 sentences. He read them slowly. She wrote about how he worked nights sometimes and was still awake when she left for school. She wrote about the time he drove 40 minutes to return a wallet he found in a parking lot because he said the person was probably worried. She wrote about how he always fixed things, the cabinet hinge she had noticed, and how he did it quietly without making it a story. The last sentence read, "My dad fixes things nobody else wants to touch because he says someone has to." Brickey stood in the kitchen for a long time. He didn't cry. He stood very still with both hands flat on the counter and breathed through the specific ache of being known completely by the one person whose opinion of you costs the most. He thought about Friday. He thought about what gets filed. He thought about what it would mean for Jean to watch her father become someone who had been pushed into silence and had eventually accepted the shape of it. He was still standing there when, at 7:30 in the evening, someone knocked on his door. He didn't recognize her at first, not because she'd changed, but because context changes people. Pamela from HR was a woman he knew in fluorescent light, behind a desk, in the careful language of institutional process. At his front door in a dark green jacket he had never seen before, without the lanyard and the branded pen and the building behind her, she was simply a person who had made a decision to be somewhere she didn't have to be. He let her in, he offered tea. She accepted, and he understood that the tea was not about thirst. She sat at his kitchen table and told him things in the direct, quiet way of someone who has already calculated what they're risking by saying them. She told him Ruth Harlow had attempted 4 times to obtain his name through official channels. She told him each attempt had been intercepted, rerouted, unanswered, buried in the administrative process the way inconvenient things get buried when someone further up the structure has decided they should be. She told him that Ross had completed termination paperwork citing conduct unbecoming of a venue employee, and that it was sitting in a folder and that the folder would be submitted on Friday unless something in the situation changed before then. Brickey listened without interrupting. He had learned a long time ago that some information needs space to land. Then Pamela looked at him across the kitchen table, Jean's essay still on the refrigerator behind him, the strawberry magnet holding it steady. And she asked him a question in the voice of someone who had been carrying it since she arrived at his door. If someone walked back in there and told the truth, the whole truth, would you want to be in the room? Brickey didn't hesitate. He had spent 2 days being careful. He was finished with it. Yes, he said. Pamela reached into her jacket pocket and placed her phone on the table between them, screen up, showing a text thread. He leaned forward and read it. It was a conversation she had been pulled into the night before. The name at the top of the thread was Ruth Harlow. The last message was 4 words. It read, "Find him. I'm coming." Ruth Harlow arrived at the Meridian Grand at 8:43 on a Tuesday morning. Brickey knew the exact time because he had been standing in the lobby since 8:30, reinstated by a phone call he still hadn't fully processed, a call that had come at 7 o'clock that morning from a number he didn't recognize, a woman's voice telling him quietly and without preamble that he should come in today, that his access card would work, that someone had made sure of it. He had stood in his bedroom holding the phone for a full minute after the call ended. Then he had woken Jean, made her breakfast, walked her to the corner, and driven to the Meridian Grand in the early morning light with the specific stillness of a man who has stopped trying to predict what comes next. He was standing near the lobby entrance when the car pulled up outside. She stepped out wearing a charcoal blazer and an expression he recognized, not from the gala, not from the woman by the window with the tilting glass, but from something older and quieter. It was the expression of someone who had spent 4 days deciding exactly what they were going to say and had arrived at a version they would not be talked out of. She walked through the lobby without stopping at the front desk. She did not ask for Ross. She went directly to the main staff corridor and told the first person she encountered to gather everyone available into the events hall in 10 minutes. She used her name when she said it. She didn't need to say anything else. The room filled quickly and with the particular silence of people who understand that something is happening that will matter later. Front desk staff, kitchen staff, event supervisors, housekeeping. Eli from the bar, who stood near the sidewall with his hands in his apron pockets and his eyes on the floor. Ross arrived last, taking a position near the back with the careful neutrality of a man calculating in real time. Brickey stood near the rear left wall. He did not sit. He kept his hands at his sides, and he watched Ruth Harlow walk to the front of the room and turn to face all of them. She did not raise her voice once in the 22 minutes she spoke. She began at the beginning, not at the gala but before it. She described how her drink order had been tracked across 6 prior company events, some the pattern invisible until she mapped it herself in a hotel room over 4 sleepless days. She described the gala in sequence, the 2 drinks she ordered, the 2 that arrived from servers not assigned to her section, the way the alcohol content of the later glasses differed from what she'd asked for. She held up her phone and showed the room a screenshot of a call log, Mary and Kish communicating with a third number all evening. She told them whose number it was. She told them what that person did for a living and why they had been invited inside the building. She spoke about it the way someone speaks about a wound they have finished being shocked by and are now simply describing, with flatness, with precision, without the performance of outrage. The outrage was underneath it, quiet and load-bearing, the way foundations are. Mary started to say something. Ruth looked at her once and Mary stopped. Kish did not try. Ruth named the scheme in full. She named who built it, who executed it, and what it had been designed to cost her. She named it in a room full of people who had spent 4 days circulating a different version. And she let the silence after each sentence do the work of replacing one story with another. Then she paused. The room was completely still in the way that rooms go still when they understand something has shifted and are waiting to find out what comes next. She said, "There was one person in this building that night who saw what was happening and made a different choice. He had every reason not to. He did it anyway." She looked toward the back of the room. She said his name. Brickey felt it move through the room before he felt it move through himself. The shift, the turning of faces, the recalibration of a space that had spent 4 days arranging itself around his absence. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood where he was and let himself be seen, which was the hardest thing he had done in a very long time. Mary and Kish were walked out within the hour. Ross received a formal notice before noon. The hardship fund, adornment for 11 years, mentioned in the employee handbook in the way that things are mentioned when no one expects them to be used, was activated that afternoon. The first disbursement was assigned to immigration legal fees for a banquet supervisor named Brickey Osei. That evening, Jean fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes from home. Brickey drove through the city with the window cracked and the reinstatement letter on the dashboard and the night air moving through the car. The city was lit up the way it always was, indifferent, glittering, making no promises. He didn't have a word yet for what the last 4 days had cost him, or what this one had returned. He wasn't sure the word existed. When they got home, Jean went to bed without being asked. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the refrigerator. In the morning, he found she had added a line to the bottom of her essay in the same careful, slightly uneven handwriting. And sometimes the people he fixes things for say thank you in front of everyone. He left it on the refrigerator. He left the strawberry magnet exactly where it was. There are men who do the right thing in the dark and ask nothing of the light. And then there are mornings, quiet, unannounced, when the light finds them anyway.